Look, this is going to be a tutorial on the first Warthog out of bounds launch for coastal out of bounds. So first thing to note is that I'm carrying over 3 plasminades through the cutscene. So you can try and grab plasminades at the first section of Coastal Highway, or in full game you would want to carry over plasminades from Data Hive. In the case that you don't have any plasminades by this time in the mission, there's a set of 6 grunts at the start here that we can hopefully get at least 2 plasminades from to be able to do the first launch. As you notice here, right off the bat, Dare isn't moving, and that's because she's waiting for us to get into the hog. She will eventually move, but she won't start until we get into the hog. So, like Buck's encouraging us to do, we're going to get into the hog as soon as possible, but while we're doing that, we also want to get Buck out of the hog, because he can interfere with our launch. So as we jump over to the driver's seat, we're going to be getting Buck out of the Warthog, and then into the Warthog. So these are the grunts that you can get extra plasminades from. Hopefully this is all you need to get extra plasminades. Otherwise we're going to do the following driving route. Get Buck out of the Warthog, drive this way. And this section's on a bit of a timer until Dare opens the door, but we've got a little bit to do, so we want to try and do everything we need to before the door opens. Here we want to try and run over at least a couple grunts, plus this Furod grunt. The Furod grunt generally needs to die before we attempt the first launch. He can be a bit of a troll and death shot you, but it's important that he dies on easy and ledge, as he can interrupt our launch setup. So now on easy we should be able to do the launch relatively uninterfered, but I want to point out that since we were able to kill a couple of the grunts, the rest of the grunts have been a bit scared and have started running around, and they've actually started running to us. So now, after we do our first launch, these grunts are closer to us, so that we can hopefully farm plasminades more conveniently. Rather than having to chase the grunts down the highway, they run to us while we do first launch, and then we're able to pick up extra nades for the second launch. So try to run over 2 to 3 grunts, one of them being the Furod grunt. He can be a bit of a troll and death shot, but it's generally best to run him over, drive over this way, set up for the first launch, so these grunts move down this way. On Legendary, a little bit different. Generally want to avoid the grunts, get out, kill the Furod grunt, and then do first launch. You can also choose to kill all of the grunts before you do first launch. It doesn't really lose time, it's more of a safety strat. It just means that if you miss the first launch, it's a bigger revert to try again. So what I'm going to do now is just clear out these grunts, just so that we have a nice clean attempt at doing the first launch. Okay, so now we're going to go over the positioning of the hog for the first hog launch. And I've just cleared out the grunts just for the sake of the convenience for this tutorial. On easy difficulty and even on ledge, you can do this while the grunts are still alive, provided you're quick to set up, as this trailer provides a bit of cover from the grunts. So positioning of this hog is just on this ramp here, and we're going to be lining up the edge of the hog with the dark line on the ground, and we're going to be putting the tire, the center of the tire along this line here. So there's sort of this grate looking pattern, and we want to put the center line of the tire on top of this line here. It can be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but this is what you want to try and aim for. And then as we get out of the hog here, we want to switch to our SMG, flip the hog and shoot it to the side, and this gets it out of the way of all the explosions that are here. Interesting thing to note about this hog is that it's actually invincible. You can shoot it with as many rockets, stick it with as many nades as you like, and it won't completely blow up. It will always be drivable. This hog, however, isn't. Ideally, it lands flipped, but as long as it's out of the way, that's all it needs to be the case. Then we go over here and we grab rockets and make sure that we have SMG. It's really important to have SMG for these launches, as the rate at which you can throw nades is different based off which weapon you had out. So I've got a video on this, but I'll just quite quickly show it here. The rate at which you can throw nades with the SMG is a lot faster than the rate at which you can throw nades with the rockets. And it's actually different for every weapon. Should you not have an SMG for whatever reason, the next best backups are probably the automag and the needler. So if you can get a needler from a grunt or an automag, that will be a next best backup, but it's ideal to have the SMG for these launches. So now if you're quick and you've gotten Buck out of the Warthog, he usually won't be here. However, sometimes he can teleport. So if he's too far away, he'll eventually teleport here, he'll shoot some of the grunts and then hop onto the turret. So our nade stack is going to land at the back of this turret. And if we got nades landing back here, Buck's going to actually get out of the Warthog when our nade is thrown, and he's going to be standing right where we want nades to land and we want to shoot our rocket. He can get in the way a little bit. So there's a couple ways to deal with Buck. One is to just get him out of the Warthog turret, and you can get in the Warthog to encourage him to get back into the seat, but he'll go to a different seat from when he was ejected. So he'll go to the passenger seat. And this is fine for the launch. Alternatively, what you can do is if you just get in the driver's seat of this Warthog, he'll eventually make his way out and jump into this Warthog. And this just gets him completely out of the way. Usually the Warthog's parked a little bit closer, and he doesn't try to jump over the trailer, and he's in. And now, once we get out, he'll stay in there unless we get into this hog. So now Buck's out of the way, we're going to look at where we stand. So look at this blue line here. Oh, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention is the side of the hog parked up alongside this line. So one way to see it, it's where the marine and the rocket is. These things can move though, so you're looking for this solid line here. So that's how far across you want the hog, and this is how far up you want the hog. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right is fine. A little bit up, a little bit back is fine. Should it be a little bit further up or a little bit further back, or a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, you might just need to adjust your setup slightly. So should the hog be set up as it is right now, I usually stand about here. So toe slightly ahead of this blue spot. So there's a blue line where the end of the blue spot is. I have my toe just sticking slightly above it. A little bit back, like here, is fine. A little bit forward is fine. That's what you want to aim for. And then when you look up, you should be able to see the space behind the Warthog. So you don't want to be looking at the Warthog, and you generally don't want to be down this blue line. You want to be looking at the space behind the Warthog. I'll have my HUD settings in the description, but it's 95 FOV with lowered. Typically it shouldn't matter too much, but should you be having issues with launches, you might want to consider how you might adjust the setup based off what your HUD specifications are. So now to do the launch, we're going to be utilizing 2 plasma nades, 2 frag nades, and a rocket. The order is going to be plasma nade first, then a frag, and then a plasma nade. All of those nades, you're just throwing them as quickly as you can. You don't need to time them, just spam throw nade until all 4 nades are thrown. Then we're going to switch weapons to the rocket, and after a very brief delay, shoot the rocket behind the nade stack to launch the hog. So we're going to do this all from this position here until we get to the last nade. So we're going to do it 1 nade at a time. So very simple. We're going to look straight up, make sure we're straight on with the wall. We don't want to be looking on an angle, straight on, and then it's just going to be plasma nade. So that's the first nade. Very straightforward. It's going to land behind the hog. The second nade is going to be a frag. So it's plasma nade, frag. Again, very straightforward. The next one is going to be a frag, and we're going to look about here. Here is where we want to throw the frag. So again, this is with lowered crosshair 95 FOV. I believe lowered versus centered shouldn't impact this lineup too much. The FOV shouldn't impact it too much either because we're looking at the center of the screen. However, you may wish to switch to my HUD settings and look at this spot, and then switch to your HUD settings and see how the lineup may be changed. So somewhere between here and here is where we want to throw the next frag. So what that would look like is plasma, frag, look here, frag. And you want to try and do that as fast as you can. So plasma, frag, frag. And then lastly, we want to throw up second plasma nade. So plasma, frag, frag, just plasma, add it to the stack. Yep. So haven't got enough launching power yet. What we need to do is add in a rocket. And what that looks like in the end is something like this. We're going to shoot our rocket behind the stack, sort of in this rough area. So we're not going to shoot it at the stack, we're going to shoot it behind the stack, because what this does is it actually chain reacts the nades into the hog, and it helps not only add explosive power to the launch, but also some horizontal momentum to the launch. And the way these nades are pushed into the hog actually sort of carries momentum into the hog to help it travel the distance. So let's see how we go. Plasma, frag, frag, plasma, switch weapons to the rockets, and launch. Okay, not bad, not bad. So one thing we can do to help the hog go even further is we're actually going to utilize our SMG. So SMG is used to throw the nades, switch to the rockets. You notice I jump and shoot, that's just to help me get a downwards angle on the ground. You know, it's hard to sort of pinpoint an angle on the ground from a low trajectory, so I just jump to help me get a good downwards angle on the ground. And then I switch back to my SMG, because what I want to do is I actually want to shoot the hog midair. So again, this hog's invincible, so we can do as much damage as we like to it. And the SMG actually has some pushing power on the hog. So you can see the way that I'm moving the hog here. And when we shoot it in the air, it actually adds some more force to it. So I'm going to try that launch and also add in some SMG bullets to help push the hog. Okay, so that's roughly what that launch looks like. So I'm just going to go into a couple of the interesting details about this launch that you might want to take note of should you be having issues with getting the hog to fly in a somewhat straight direction. Okay, so we're going to work backwards from the hog down towards the chain reaction and the rockets to sort of break down how this launch works. And this is kind of important understanding to make sure that you can work out how to correct your setup should you be having issues. So very clearly, if we have a nade behind the hog, right in the middle, it's going to push the hog in a straight line forwards. If we have a nade to the side of the hog, it's going to push it to the side, the opposite side. So we have a nade on the right-hand side, it's going to push it to the left. Similarly, if we have a nade on the left, it's going to push it to the right. So that's all pretty straightforward. But now we need to factor in how our rocket interacts with our grenades. Alright, so I'm on this slope here just so we can get a better bird's eye view of how the rocket interacts with the grenades. So looking at this line here, if I throw the grenade on the line and shoot the rocket on the line, plasma nade chain reacts in a straight direction. However, if I throw the plasma nade on the line and throw the rocket on the left, plasma nade chain reacts to the right. Similarly, plasma nade on the line, rocket to the right, plasma nade will chain react to the left. Just like that. So what we've got here is sort of a double interaction with the rocket, the nade, and the hog. So if we go back to our hog, if you can imagine our nade stack is here behind the hog. If we have the nade stack here and our rocket lands here, we should get a nice straight line launch with the hog. If our nade stack is slightly off, or if our rocket is slightly off, it can impact the direction in which the hog travels. So let's say the nades land slightly far to the left side of the hog, and we shoot the rocket in the middle, or even to the right-hand side of the hog, it's going to send the nades in this direction. Now once the nades go in this direction, they're going to cause an explosion on the left side of the hog, and that's going to send the hog to the right. And this has risk of it landing off these two ramps, out of bounds. Similarly, if our nades land to the right-hand side of the hog and our rocket lands center or left side, it can cause an explosion on the right side and send our hog into the wall and then off the map. So you should be looking to either line things up in a straight line, so nade stack in the middle, rocket in the middle. If anything, you might want to rocket slightly to the left side of the hog, because you would rather it go slightly too far to the left than slightly too far to the right. This wall here, the hog can bounce off it, it's still land in a position where we can drive it. However, if you shoot the rocket slightly too far to the right side of the hog, nades go to the left, it has more of a chance of bouncing off the edge. So nade stack, aim for the middle, rocket, aim for the middle or slightly to the left side of the hog. You can use this to help you adjust a potentially bad setup. So if you throw your plasma nades too far to the right hand side of the hog, you want to correct your rocket to also be on the right hand side of the hog. Similarly, if you throw your nades poorly and they end up too far on the left hand side of the hog, you want to correct the setup by shooting your rocket also on the left hand side of the hog. If your nades are too far to the left and you don't adjust the setup, it will cause the whole hog to typically land too far to the right. So what I'll do now is I'll try and show that some bad launches in action. And that was a bit of an example of throwing the nades a bit far to the left, shooting the rocket a bit far to the right, the nades exploded to the left side of the hog, and sent the hog too far to the right, off the ramp, and somewhere where we can't get it. Alright, so now we've sort of learned how to launch the hog and a little bit of the mechanics of the launch itself. So now we need to talk about where we actually want this hog to be. So there's a soft barrier that sits sort of roughly in this area here. And we need to get this hog past the sort of the beginnings of the barrier. So the barrier is sort of this large volume that extends really far back. But all we need to do is sort of get this hog past the edges of that barrier. So basically what we need to do is get the driver's side part of the hog. So this driver's seat roughly past this bottom line here. So there's 1, 2, 3 lines here. 1, 2, 3. We want to get the driver's seat above this third line. That's probably the best visual indicator to know whether the hog is far enough up the ramp so that when we get past the barrier ourselves, we can actually drive this hog out of bounds. So ideally, you are able to launch the hog far enough up the ramp and so it lands wheels down with a driver's seat past this third part of the ramp, this third line on the ramp. However, that's not always the case. As you can tell by the launch, there is a little bit of randomness to it, but we are able to try and influence how the hog lands. So one way is you can try and influence how it lands by when you're shooting it with the SMG in the air. It's kind of a minor way to influence how and where it lands. Our sort of heavyweight solution from down here, that is the rocket launcher. So we use one rocket to launch the hog, switch to the SMG, shoot to push it, and then we can switch back to our rocket to try and deflect it to land where we would like it to. Typically I like to jump back onto this trailer here, so it gives me a better angle on where to shoot the rocket. So sometimes the hog will be upside down, sliding down the ramp, and there are some situations where it will continue to slide all the way down below the highway. Sometimes it will stop, and you kind of get to sort of learn under what circumstances this happens with time. But should it be sliding down, we can try and shoot a rocket to try and push the hog and flip it, or push it into one of the gaps or the side of the wall and get it stuck somewhere above this third line. So what I'm going to do is try and do a few launches where the hog goes far enough but is starting to slide or in an uncomfortable position. And I'll try and show you what it looks like to use a rocket to correct the hog position. Okay, so not completely saved, but this sort of shows a couple of ways in which you can try and influence the hog's position. Should it not land in a great spot? So shot the rocket to try and flip the hog and push it back up the ramp. And then you can also use the SMG to sort of slow its momentum try and get it in a sort of facing up and down the ramp to stop its momentum. Once it slows down enough, it will sort of the friction of the hog on the surface will sort of keep it in place. Once it's got a bit of downwards momentum, it will keep sliding, but you can use the SMG just to sort of shoot it, push it in place, try and get it facing up and down the ramp so that it generally gets stuck this way. And one thing to note about the rocket is that we want to get the rocket to land below the hog, and it's quite a long distance between us and where the rocket needs to travel to. So we want to lead the hog. So as the hog's sliding down, you generally want to shoot a little bit lower than you think, so that when the rocket hits the ramp, it catches the hog as it's sliding down. If you sort of shoot it where the hog is, the hog will keep sliding and the rocket will end up hitting the hog or even hit above the hog. So that's a couple of tools in which you can try and save the launch should the hog not land correctly. All the minor details of this are a bit hard to explain. There's lots of different scenarios in which you might have to deal with. So it's something that is best learnt with experience. But this gives you a couple of ideas that you can try and implement yourself. Alright, so I've just done a hog launch and got myself out of bounds with my first hog landing in this position. So this is a scenario where we have to do a bit of extra work to get it into a drivable state. So again, this hog's invincible, so we can use some of our additional rockets or extra frags like this plasma. We can try and use it to flip this hog such that the driver's seat is past this line here. So let's see what that might look like. And again, it can get stuck in different positions. It can get stuck in this gap here. It can get stuck in this gap here. It can get stuck just below the line here, sort of where the soft barrier edge ends. But we're just going to try from this position here.
Don't worry, we got you covered.
Alright, so now we're out of bounds. So that's an example of me being able to save this hog. I ended up using 2 rockets there. I will admit, didn't get it first try. Took me a few attempts just to work out how to get the hog unstuck from that position. And again, it can get stuck in lots of different angles and lots of different spots, and you sort of have to just work out what the best way with the resources you have to get out of bounds.
Don't worry, we got you covered.
So I just show off this common formation with the hog. If it's sliding down like this, you want to get it on this angle and flip it and shoot to help push it up as you flip it. If you get it on that sidewards angle, it should flip nicely and not fly off the map and do strange things like it sometimes can. So if you can, try and turn it sideways with the edge of the hog down in front of you so you can sort of see the underside of the hog. Flip it and shoot it, and that helps, the shooting helps push it up the ramp a bit and help it flip nicely. If it's sort of on a different angle, the flip prompt can sometimes cause the hog just to sort of fly off the map.
Don't worry, we got you covered.
So there's sort of an example of the flip prompt being a bit strange and not as kind. And it can actually make the hog sort of fall further than you would like it to. So again, hog can get stuck in lots of different positions. You can try and use plasminades to help you. Try and push the hog out of bounds. See if it helps in different scenarios. And you just have to try your luck based off wherever it lands. Ideally, you save at least 1 rocket for the end, but if you need to sort of save the run, use all the rockets you can just to get the driver's seat past this line. I've just tried to set up here one other sort of failed example. In this case, the hog's wheels down, in a not too bad spot. It's just a little bit lower than we need it to be. So we got ourselves past the barrier, and we're going to try and use rockets from here to try and get the hog up past this line. So there's a couple of ways that you can sort of approach the situation. One is to shoot underside of the hog. The other is to try and get a decent angle from the side. And we'll see how I go with a couple of these methods in this sort of relatively common scenario. So that almost got it far enough, and I'll show you last little desperado. So I could try and use another rocket here, but I want to save a rocket at the end. If it's just not quite far enough, again we want the driver's seat there, you can melee the hog to push it, and you generally want to push one side up and then the other side. So if you're, really close to where you need the hog to be, but not quite, and you don't want to invest any additional resources, meleeing does work. So I'm going to push the hog just a bit further up this line. So I'll show you here, if I get in the hog now, I'm actually able to drive off and drive out of bounds. If the hog was just a little bit lower, so this is the case where the driver's seat isn't quite high enough. If I get into it, this is what it looks like in a failed attempt. You sort of get stuck in bounds and you're unable to drive where we want to go. When the hog is high enough, we should be able to just get in and drive ourselves out of bounds. One brief thing before we get to the end of the video that I forgot to mention is that while you do have some time to sort of use rockets and grenades to help get hogs unstuck and past this part of the barrier, on Legendary you do have to take note that Dare is driving past some enemies and eventually gets to a doorway and has to wait there until we get there. And during this time the enemies will be shooting her and lowering her shields. And if you take too long to get this hog unstuck and past the barrier, it can affect sort of her health cycling, and she can end up dying in this first section of the highway or at subsequent sections of the highway. So you do, especially on legendary difficulty, want to be quick at getting this hog unstuck. Obviously you want to be fast for speedrun reasons, but on legendary it just helps ensure that Dare survives this section of the highway and the next few sections of the highway. So getting the hog stuck is a little bit more dangerous on Legendary. Ideally, get a bit of a cleaner launch, particularly on Legendary, not just for time save, but just for consistency purposes. So that's most of everything that you kind of need to know about the first hog launch for Coast Out of Bounds. What I'm going to do now is try and put together a sort of somewhat complete example of just the first launch itself and then sort of getting in the hog and driving off. But before I do that, there are some minor details here and there that even I don't quite fully understand at this point in time, and some details that I maybe haven't been able to convey cleanly. So I do encourage you to spend lots of time practicing the launch itself and sort of understanding where that barrier is. I use this sort of bottom third line as a good guide. It's slightly on the safer side, depending on the angle of the hog and where exactly the driver's seat is. Sometimes a little bit lower down does work, but it's best to sort of get yourself into those positions yourself and understand exactly where the edge of that barrier is, from when the hog is too low and you can't drive it out of bounds, and when it's high enough that you can. So there are custom checkpoint tools that allow you to make checkpoints at any point. But if you don't have access to these tools, whether you're on console or just don't have access to the tool, I'll show you a nifty way to get an in-game checkpoint, which allows you basically just to practice this launch relatively just in isolation. And that is you want to avoid hitting this trigger until you're all set up. And then once you're set up, you can walk over this black part, delay the checkpoint a few melees, and then you'll get a checkpoint around now, and that allows you to practice doing the launch over and over on this checkpoint. So once you got a checkpoint, custom or natural, spend a bit of time practicing the launch, and again I'll try and put together now a somewhat clean example to show you what the first hog launch itself should look like. And ideally we can get this hog to land close to the barrier but past it. The further it goes, the safer it goes. You can sometimes get it to launch over this ridge line or even sometimes onto the top of this wall here. But in terms of speed, we want to break past the barrier ourselves and get back into this hog as soon as possible. So an ideal launch will have the hog land somewhere in these areas here, wheels down, so that we can drive away straight away. But as long as it gets past this line, it should be good to go. All right, let's try and just put together one good example.
found a way to extend its shields, send a current to the outer plating. I don't know how strong the shields are, so stay close.
And we're off and away. So I think that was a good example of sort of showing how you can even maybe use the SMG to help influence how the hog lands and hopefully get it tires down. Alright, so yeah, again, that's sort of my tips and tricks on the first hog launch for Coast Out of Bounds. Definitely encourage you to spend some time with it and try and learn some of the details yourself, and maybe find potential improvements and updates to the way that I go about things. And other aspects of the Out of Bounds, such as the second launch, the driving, and maybe a bit of the end fight as well, hopefully be covered in other videos. Thanks for watching.